This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
As followers of Jesus, in whom all things were made, we acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the country on where this podcast is recorded. We recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters and thank them for protecting this land and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today.
Paddy, who is this Ruth Maskell? And she said, oh, she's an ex-nun. She's been in the convent for 8 years and she's just come back. I thought to myself, look, I quite like the sound of this girl. So I rang her back and I said, Ruth, you don't know me. We spoke earlier. I'm David Hume, and I'd like to invite you on a blind date with a difference.
I'm Georgia and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that reminds you of the good in the world. Each episode tells the story of someone who has found real hope in challenging times and made the world a better place. Episode 53, David Hume. David Hume has had a remarkable life. He's had several fruitful careers in radio, retail and recruitment, to name a few. He's a keen musician and was once the lead singer of a popular band called the Gondoliers. He's sailed the Sydney to Hobart yacht race not once, but twice. He's had 2 wonderful marriages, which has given him 8 children and 20 grandchildren. And he's done all of this completely blind. David was born blind and has spent his life defying the odds and barriers placed upon him. He's recently written a memoir called Blind Without Barriers, and it's an honour to have him on the podcast today. David, welcome.
Lovely to be here with you, Georgia.
David, at the back of the book, you describe your life story as a little bit controversial at times, which I think is a really interesting description. I love that choice of words. What would you say has made your life so controversial? I
think the fact that I've been successful and I've had more wins than losses, but I've also had ups and downs. And at times I've been put under tremendous pressure. And I believe I've done some things which people would not have suggested that I could do. Yes, it's been controversial, but I think it's all no barriers and in fact no holds barred. It's the honest truth as I see it.
That's amazing. David, let's go back to the beginning. The doctors found out you were blind when you were 1, but you'd actually been blind since birth. What happened?
Well, I wasn't. I actually was sighted at birth, but I was placed in an incubator, which was a standard treatment then for premature babies. And I lost my sight by virtue of too much oxygen. My other 4 siblings were born not prematurely, and of course they were all sighted.
Okay, so was this a common thing? Babies born premature and then like overdosed on oxygen? What was the situation?
During that time, 10,000 babies lost their sight through too much oxygen and incubators.
Wow. David, can you describe your early childhood? You said you had 4 siblings. Both your parents worked very hard. What was your early childhood like as you remember it?
My father, being a down-to-earth working class man, I think he was a bit ashamed of me initially because he felt that was an affront against his manhood. But he quickly changed and he became a good dad. And my mother was fantastic. She treated me as much as she possibly could as a normal person. And therefore, I was made to be gently independent as a young child. For instance, if I dropped something, my mother wouldn't pick it up for me. She'd tell me where it was, and I had to go and get it. And at the age of 5, she made the most important decision in her life, which was to send me to a boarding school more than 300 kilometres away in Sydney at the age of 5. And I spent 9 years at a boarding school for blind and partially sighted children.
Can you describe that schooling experience for me?
Well, I was thrown in off the deep end because at that stage I didn't know really how to dress myself or do up my shoes, and I was thrown into a boarding school where the staff were kind enough, but they had too much on their plate, and I was left to struggle. Eventually, I made some friends, and I also gained the respect and goodwill of several of the staff, and they helped me. And I guess I got my way through. What it taught me was independence and competitiveness. I became very competitive and very independent very, very quickly. It had to be in that sort of a partially hostile environment. And by the time I left school, I was a quite independent and I'd like to think partially aggressive individual. I knew what I wanted and went after it.
So you said in the book that you, quote unquote, escaped at 14. Did you run away? Did you just leave school and go back to Muswellbrook? What was the situation?
No, a very smart teacher, Leah Wilson, another blind lady, suggested that I needed to leave the school and go to a normal high school. And so I went back to Muswellbrook High and did the last couple of years of schooling there.
What was that situation like? You know, you've been at a blind school all your life.
They were well educated by my teachers, and they gave me buddies, friends to help me become integrated in the school and make friends. And the whole experience was far, far better than I was at the blind school.
So you left school, you did your final 2 years of high school, and you said in the book that you kind of felt weighed down by the financial and also the physical barriers you were facing. How did you start to overcome that as you left school?
Well, I really wanted to be a lawyer, but to be a lawyer, the only thing I really wanted to do was be a barrister. And there was just too much problems in terms of the amount of help that you'd have to get. And I'm a person that wanted to have as little help as I possibly could. And my parents didn't have the money anyway to put me through university. So after bumbling around for over a year, getting into places like Apex and Rostrum and getting some personal education, I got into local government as a clerk, where I had a very, very good mentor in Ray Morris, my first boss, who got me into Apex and to Rostrum, where I learned public speaking, debating, and general meeting procedure. And then I was in a band, a fairly humble band at that stage, but we were invited to Gulgong, which is the town on the $10 note, a very progressive little town, to play music. And that's where I met George and Peter, two of my lifetime friends. And we formed, they had a group called the Gondoliers, but I changed that to the Gondoliers. And we built a wonderful 5-piece group.
So you've had a range of different careers, you know, radio recruitment, sales. I wish we had time to talk about them all. I do want to talk a little bit about radio. How did you get into it, and what kind of accommodations were made?
Well, I was playing music in Gulgong with the newly formed group, the Gondoliers. And I was interviewed by Ron Camplin, the manager of 2MG, the Mudgee station. And he said to me, "David, you've got a good voice. You know what, you should look at radio." I said, "I have tried to look at radio, but I was denied by my Muswellbrook radio station. The manager there wasn't interested in me." He said, "But there are no things that would stop you. We could work around all the issues that might be impediments for you. I'd like you to consider it." So I went back to Muswellbrook, thought about it for a while. I rang him and said, "Yes, if you're prepared to train me, I'm prepared to have a career in radio." Initially, I was a radio announcer, a newsreader, a sports commentator, and then I got bored with being on radio, and I said to Ron, "I want something more than this." And he said, "Look, you've got a convincing manner. You're a natural sales type person. You like football. Just go and sell it." Well, I had to sell football, but the radio station area was from Mudgee to Coonamble, which was about 300 kilometres.
Oof.
And I had to travel from place to place, using the goodwill of my clients to travel, One particular, Mr. Cyril Blowers, used to take me to Coonabarabran and other areas that he had stores in. And I'd either take my guide dog, or in the latter stages when I had been successful as a salesperson, I used to take my secretary.
What kind of accommodations were made as, an announcer or a commentator?
Oh, look, I knew a lot about sport, and therefore I could comment on sport. But as I said to you, when I did a half of a rugby league match, it was arranged that my boss would put headphones on me, and that was linked to a microphone which he would use, several feet away, so it wouldn't affect the broadcast. He would give me the facts, and I would translate those facts of, for instance, there's a scrum pack down on the halfway mark. Irwin puts the ball in, it comes out on the Mudgee side, it slings out to the 5'8". Taylor whipped through to Knorr, the winger, who streaks down the touchline, steps inside 2 tackles and scores under the post.
That's perfect. You're just making it more interesting.
Well, I think you do that, yeah.
Let's talk about also your guide dogs. You're the longest serving guide dog owner in Australia. How did this begin?
Well, it began when I was 17, and I had my first plane trip to Perth, where the guide dogs at that particular stage were operative. And my first guide dog was a Labrador Kelpie cross called Perry. And the problem with Perry and the early guide dogs was they were donated dogs, and so their pedigrees were unknown, and as a result, some of their behaviours were also unknown. And I had, as a young guide dog owner, I had my hands full with Perry, who was, being Labrador Kelpie, was very highly strung, more than most Labradors are. We were in Perth for 4 weeks, and we started out in being led by the trainer. Then we were introduced to the harness, and we ultimately moved from quieter areas to the city. And Perry saved my life in Perth because a truck burst through the lights in Hay Street and almost killed me, and Perry just stopped just in time and threw himself across my legs. But that wasn't the first time, because when we got to Mudgee, I was walking to the radio station and crossing the railway line, and a diesel-motored train coasted down off the hill without its motor on. And the first thing I knew about it was it blew its horn on the crossing as I was about to cross, and the dog again threw himself across my legs, stopped me. When I got to the radio station, that's when I had my first taste of alcohol, because my boss said, "Listen, you're shaking. You need brandy in your coffee," which I had and enjoyed.
David, can you describe the bond between a guide dog and their owner? Because it's more than just a pet owner situation.
Okay, I describe it this way: the dog is a pilot, and you're the navigator. The dog is your servant, and you are the pack leader. So basically, it's built on trust on your part and respect on his, and that doesn't always come easily, and it didn't to Perry. When I was walking down the street once, I heard a young girl screaming, and I heard crunching because Perry had taken a double-headed ice cream out of her hand, and I had to pay for it. So.
Oh, getting you into all kinds of mischief.
But he was also loyal and very, very clever. And once I grew more mature and more experienced, he was a great guide dog.
Yeah, so you both kind of grew together.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the lives of dogs are a lot shorter than the lives of humans, and you've owned 7 guide dogs throughout your life.
8.
Oh, 8.
And one of them failed. Guide dogs are usually used to streets and corners and crossings, and whereas living in this retirement village where I am now, it's like a university campus, and the dog didn't adjust to that. But my current dog, Murphy, he's done very well.
So what is the process like when, having to change guide dogs? Do you just have to do the training all over again? Like, how long does it take, the adjustment period, or is it different?
Well, for people like me, the guide dogs made a consideration, and they used to do domiciliary programs where they would actually come to me and spend a shorter period of time, more intensive than the one I had early in the piece. Because when you've had 8 guide dogs, you've got a fair bit of experience and you've done a fair bit of the training. So they could afford to cut things short and be more specific and more professional.
Yeah, it's so interesting. David, you were the first blind person to sail the Sydney to Hobart, and you've done that not once but twice, 1984 and 1985, if I'm not mistaken, in a boat called Out of Sight, Out of Mind, which I think is a very clever title. Sailing, obviously quite traditionally reliant on sight. How did you first come to learn?
Well, I started sailing in dinghies. I bought a 16-foot Corsair once I got really interested in sailing, having been taken on a sailboard by a friend who'd sold me a speedboat previously. So I bought a Corsair from Terry Eldred, and my first wife Ruth and I sailed, but I was Fletcher Christian. She was the original Captain Bligh, so we didn't sail to get along. But Ruth was a very good sailor. But I then sailed with a friend of mine, Barry Branson, and we bought a Flying Dutchman, which is the fastest monohull boat in the world, an Olympic class boat, and I had a wonderful time flying the trapeze and sailing as forward hand on the Dutchman, and we did very well. Then I went into trailable yachts, which ultimately led to the purchase of Out of Sight, Out of Mind with my psychiatrist friend, Mike Epstein. Yeah.
Tell me about the race in 1984. Quite eventful.
It was very eventful. It was, at that time, the roughest on record. We had 60 knots across the deck and 40-foot seas. And sailing down the coast and into Bass Strait was like sailing in a witch's cauldron, because you had the conflicting currents of the New South Wales coast and the tidal work of Bass Strait. And it was a very difficult environment. Halfway across Bass Strait, we were running second. I had a good crew of former Admiral's Cup sailors and my own dinghy people, and it was a brilliant combination. And we were running second when disaster struck, because the boat got flooded and we lost the power of our engine, radio, lights, and satellite navigation equipment, and that was flying too blind even for me. So I said to the guys, look, we've got to turn around. We're approaching the Tasmanian coast at night with no lights, no way of talking to people, and frankly, we've got to call it quits. So we turned around and sailed back to Eden.
$1985, a lot more successful. Was the reason that you did it in the first place because you wanted to complete the race?
Well, there's a video on my website called My One Treasured Dream, which describes the Sydney Hobart in my voice, both of them. And the second one was, yes, it was lighter, and I got hurt in the first Sydney Hobart, and I wanted to really participate, and I did. I was on deck most of the 4 days that we were out there. And halfway down the Tasmanian coast, we got becalmed. And so we only finished in the top third of the fleet, which was pretty respectable, but not as good as we'd hoped to. But when we arrived at Hobart, it was amazing. Almost the whole town was there to welcome the fleet, and it was an amazing experience.
So great. I love that. Now, David, you've also had two wonderful marriages to Ruth and Liz. Can you share a little bit about Ruth? How did you meet her?
Well, I was selling advertising to my clients for Christmas, and I was doing a program on air for Christmas. And so I decided to sell one to Ted Marskell, a well-known stock and station agent. And who should pick up the phone but this feisty woman who virtually asked me for my name, rank, and serial number. And so I told her I was from the radio station and I was here to sell her father advertising. And she said, well, I've been away for 8 years and the radio station's not what it used to be, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, I put down the phone. I said to my friend Pat Wall, Patty, who is this Ruth Marskell? And she said, oh, she's an ex-nun. She's been in the convent for 8 years and she's just come back. I thought to myself, look, I quite like the sound of this girl. So I rang her back and I said, Ruth, you don't know me. We spoke earlier. I'm David Hume, and I'd like to invite you on a blind date with a difference. which I then told her about my blindness and so forth, and she accepted. And 5 months later, we were married. 3 kids later, I had a wonderful 20-odd years with Ruth. I often say that with my wives, Ruth made me, and when I got into trouble, Liz saved me.
Ruth passed away from cancer.
Yeah. Before she died, she said to me, David, I want you to make friends with Liz Freeman because Adrian was your friend. And at the very least, you can support each other. And who knows, maybe with her 3 kids, her 5 kids and your 3 kids, maybe the Brady Bunch, which is how it turned out.
So Liz was also a widower.
Yes, she was.
You became a single dad after you lost Ruth, and I can't imagine adjusting to that plus grieving at the same time would have been easy.
It wasn't. But you see, Liz was president of a place called a grieving group. I can't remember the name of the damn thing right off the top of my head, but a grief group. And she took me along to these grief groups, and there I learned the folly of spending too much time in the past. She taught me to put my wife's memory in a special place in my heart that I could visit any time I wanted, but that would not impact me moving forward with my life, because I met people there at these grief groups. Solace was called, by the way, Solace. And and these people at Solace, they were grieving 10 years after their partners had died and they had moved forward.
Yeah, that's really tough. You've already spoken a little bit about Liz. What was she like?
Very different to Ruth. Ruth was upfront, outgoing. Liz was too, but she was more calm, more mature, of course, too. And, I think that the thing that amazed me about her is, as she was dying, she said to her children, David has been good to my tribe, and I want you to take care of him and understand that he'll probably need another woman in his life, which, in fact, I've now managed to achieve. In fact, as 6 degrees of separation, the girl that I'm now engaged to was a very good friend of Liz's. They worked together as teenagers in the legal profession.
Oh, wow. Congratulations. That's wonderful. What have your experiences, David, taught you about grief? Because I can't imagine having to go through that once, losing your wife, let alone twice. Has it kind of evolved over time?
I think Liz's training when she was dying stood me in good stead, and I accepted 3 months in advance that she was going to die. I took it on the chin and said, I'll grieve now so I can support the kids and go forward. And the one thing that she taught me is that you need to get on with your life. You can't, you never ever lose the memory of your partner. I had 30 years with Liz, and they were great years. We had our issues and we had our problems, certainly, but there was a lot more good things come out of it than ordinary. And I can tell you that I have learned to handle grief in a positive way, if that's possible. There's only one way to handle it, to survive, and that's to go forward, whilst not forgetting the past.
Now, you have 8 children, 20 grandchildren, which I can imagine is such a blessing. I have this image in my head of you being like the very fun grandparent that's always up for an adventure. Am I correct in that?
I think that's true, because my first wife worked as an accountant, and I would say to Ruth, look, I can't see the kids much during the week because I work 60 hours a week as a consultant, and I just see them at breakfast time and after dinner. And that's all. So on the weekends, they're mine. And I used to take them, I took them for yachting lessons. We used to go walking in the forest or the mountains. And I had a great time with my 3 kids. The older boy, Blair, was fantastic. He used to look after me in such a natural manner. At 4 years of age, he was leading me through national airports.
Wow. You think it was just intuitive?
Yes, it was.
David, disability access has certainly changed over decades gone by, but there is still work to be done. What would you say do we still need to do to make sure our workplaces and the world in general is more accessible?
There's no question that a lot of things have happened over the last 50 or 60 years with blind people. It was, the public were very naive and very ill-educated. But of course, education, communication, and has done a huge amount for blind people. Particularly in recent times, we've had the access of what I call adaptive technology, whereby we can use computers freely and easily. And that has made a huge difference to blind people. Employers are infinitely more prepared to look more kindly in respect to people with disabilities. For instance, when I first came into recruitment, at least half a dozen consultancies said, you can't be a recruiter because you can't see. Jeff Slade, my first recruiter and mentor, said to me, David, of course it doesn't matter. You can see, you'll talk to the people. You'll find out what they're all about. And that, of course, was true, because when I wanted to know what a person looked like, I simply said to Denise, the receptionist, hey, Denise, what did that guy look like? Was he any good? And so she would transmit what I wanted to learn about the way they presented themselves, and I did that in respect to the way they sounded. And that was the value, because you see, in many cases, when you see somebody, you form an image which isn't always correct. And I found that if I form my image of the person based on how they sounded, what they said, and what they'd done, it was far more impressive than looking at their visual presentation.
David, what gifts have blindness brought to your life? What would you say that I'm missing out on, for example, by having sight?
Mind sight. And again, I have on my website is a video called The Power of Mind Sight. And it deals with insight, hindsight, foresight, and all from the mind. And it makes you think in a totally different way. It makes you think very much relating to intuition, insight, foresight, and hindsight. And when you think with the mind, it places a totally different context on the way you behave.
Can you give an example of how you've used mindsight in your life?
In my interviewing and my screening of candidates as a recruiter, I would put myself in their shoes. I'd be talking to them and listening to what they said, and transmitting it through my mind into conviction or opinions on what was happening. You look at things from a completely different context as a blind person. You ask questions. You really, truly listen to the answers, and you make notes of an analytical nature. It puts a totally different context into the way you view what you do, and I do that with candidates for jobs and clients that I was selling my services to. I'd put myself in the position of a client, for instance, and say, if I want to sell advertising or recruitment services to this client, what would I say? And I'd put together what I knew about the client and so forth. And if it didn't please me, I'd go back to the drawing board and start again. And it meant a lot of research, a lot of analysis, because it's the old Dale Carnegie concept. If you want somebody to be interested in you, you must first be interested in them.
That's so true. David, was there any point in your life that you wished you could see?
No, I don't think there was. Certainly in the latter stages of my life, if I were offered my sight tomorrow, I wouldn't take it, because I think that the learning curve would be so steep and the experience so frightening. And if you look at the fact that my life has been very, very different, whereas all of my siblings were either school teachers or accountants or mechanics, and my whole business I had to, through mentors, and I had three of them. My Aunt Alison, who's turned up 101 this year, she mentored me as a child. She taught me how to argue. She taught me about music. I am very, very grateful to her. Ray Morris, I've already mentioned, who helped me into service clubs and rostrum. And finally, Ron Camplin, my boss in radio, was my primary mentor, because he would not accept the fact that anything he wanted me to do, I could do. And I was up for the challenge in that.
David, it has been such an honour having you on Finding Hope today. Thank you so much for sharing so generously about your life and experience. I really appreciate it.
Well, Georgia, thank you for having me, and more particularly for your professionalism and sensitivity.
Thank you so much to David Hume for generously sharing his story today. For more information about his memoir, Blind Without Barriers, you can visit his website, davidhume.com.au. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. I'd love to hear your feedback. You can rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast and share it with your friends. Stories are always better when they're shared, and you never know what you can learn from another's journey. If you or someone you know has a story of hope to share and you'd like to be interviewed for the podcast, I'd love to hear from you. You can leave a comment on the Finding Hope page at hopepodcasts.com.au. For now, I'll leave you with this verse. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Joshua 1 verse 9. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.